I've lived in the United States. I would probably do it again. There's many things I like. I couldn't put my center of life to the United States.
From Germany to Japan, then to the United States, and now the University of Cambridge. Today's guest is Manuel from University of Cambridge, and I hope you enjoy watching this episode. Four different countries in four different universities, right? Japan, Germany, US, and now you're in Cambridge, England.
That's exactly right.
And
Yeah.
yeah, could you please introduce yourself briefly to the students and the people who are watching us, and then I can dig into more questions.
Absolutely, yeah. So I'm Manuel Iburg, or Manuel Iburg. I don't really care too much if people pronounce it in different ways. Yeah, currently a PhD in biochemistry. I work with the University of Cambridge, and my research is focused on protein nanostructures. And I think I have been committed to like academic research for a long time, so this has been attractive to me since maybe around high school time. And I also have been really attracted for a long time to the idea that when you research, it is natural that it is a very international, transnational endeavor. And in fact, I think in academia and research, it's required to be good to also have a very like transgenerational and transnational approach to this. So that's one of the things I like about it.
That's great. So let's start from the undergrad life. You started in Japan, right? Why did you choose Japan?
So my undergrad I did in Germany actually. So if I'm just going to give you a quick rundown of how that went. So I studied in Hanover, so Leibniz University, and I did a bachelor's in life sciences, which was a fairly new like program at the time. So it was a mix of biochemistry, molecular biology, but also technical chemistry and organic chemistry at that time. And I didn't initially think I would end up in that particular field of study, but I was in general focused on like biotech, biomedical type of research. And so I did my undergraduate, that means the bachelor's, which also was a fairly new idea in Germany at that time, entirely in Germany, in Hanover. And then it was more or less common in that area that you would continue to doing a master's and possibly a PhD, because like in biotech, it's unusual that you would, let's say, stop after a bachelor's. And the master's program is much more flexible in that field. So it was also at the same university. So it was very modular with lots of lab time and project based. And at that time, I arranged for the first time to study abroad, which was at the Tokyo Institute of Technology. So technically, it was already after I had one degree, and I didn't do my entire undergrads in Japan. So I began my master's in Germany, then did one semester a bit longer than that in Japan. I came back to Germany and finished my master's degree. And then my next stage was aiming for a PhD. And while I had also applied to a country abroad, to Switzerland, ultimately the position in Berlin won out. So I did my PhD in Berlin, and that was officially at Humboldt University, which you may have heard about. But the actual lab I was working in was at the FMP Berlin, which is at the very outskirts campus of the university. So I had very little contact with actually going to the university. Most of my research was really lab-based, and the university was only nominally where I studied. And it was during my PhD program that after I'd already been like motivated to have a very international outlook, and the group I was in was fairly international. And at that time, I additionally gained an interest in synthetic biology. So biology beyond just descriptive research, but like looking at biochemistry or biomedicine more as a tool, or even like an engineering discipline. And that was because I had previously made very positive experiences going abroad. I committed that I want to go abroad again, partially because at the time, and I think it's still true, the United States had by far the most research in the direction of synthetic biology going on. So it was at that time a decision, maybe like a very few groups in mainland Europe or in England or else in the United States. And then I had aimed initially for places like the Northeast or the Southwest. So that would have been like around the Bay Area or around Boston. And I had applied for this. And then there also was an offer from San Francisco, but it ended up being Houston, Rice University, which before going, I didn't know, first of all, much about Houston or Texas in general. I had a very, I guess, one-sided image of Texas, which was like deserts with like these little, tumbleweeds coming around. So I didn't at all imagine what Houston is like. And also, I didn't know much about Rice University, which is where I went after I did my PhD. And I think you have to be there to realize why Rice University is such a good choice for synthetic biology. So I only found it because I was looking for SynBio focused research groups. Um, and that is how I came to go to the United States. So does it explain it?
Yeah, that's great. So after having this experience and at the end in Rice University, which is one of the top-notch schools in the US, specifically in your field,
Yeah.
and you decided to move again to other school for more experiences, and that's how you ended in Cambridge, London. And can you
Yes.
tell about that part of the story also? What made you to move to England?
Yeah, actually, it was very serendipitous. So, as you can imagine, there's in many cases after my like a typical academic career in biochemistry would be like go get your PhD, then go for abroad for a postdoc, and then when you come back to Europe, you typically would aim for permanent or in the tenured or tenure track position. So you would somehow try to set up an independent research group, and I was thinking that it's about that time for me even though I wasn't feeling completely ready to go that step. So I did think it's a fairly common way to do this when you're in Germany and you go abroad to study and come back. However, and I'm gonna reveal this right now, it wasn't actually a part of the plan. I was contacted by a researcher from Cambridge who was running a newly established research group there, very specifically because of the research we were doing in Houston at Rice University. So we just had brought out a preprint of a paper, which I'm happy to say you could see on the title page of EMBO-J in October 24. And that was focused on one of my main research interests, which is gas vesicles, which is a type of protein nanostructure that's very interesting for biomedical and biotech applications. And my current boss, where I'm working in Cambridge right now, saw this and he was really interested in exploring this further. So he contacted me and pitched to me the idea of a project that we would be doing in Cambridge where I would again work as a postdoc. And initially I was skeptical because my perception was that it's about time for me to pursue a PI position. But then because the project sounded immensely interesting and I got convinced that having Cambridge in your CV is also easy and is a strong choice if you're applying for other positions. Plus, it's much easier to apply for positions in Europe when you're physically close, because travel between the US and Europe is a little bit more tricky, especially because you have to arrange for immigration every single time. So I hadn't planned at all to go to Cambridge before coming back to Europe, but then I was convinced. So this is how I am where I currently at. And then we did also get a fellowship for this. So that I'm well funded, and of course that makes it extra attractive to come over here.
That's great. When I'm looking at Germany, comparing it with the US, I'm seeing a different style of academic life you can experience. And you also experienced the life in Cambridge. Can you compare us these three countries? And if you have any insight about the Japan, because you've also been there, can you compare the three, four countries you've been there and tell us what was the exciting parts of every country's lifestyle, academic life you experienced, and anything that you think can help to students when they're coming to the choice of picking one of these schools or universities and countries to live?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I'll have to think about this a bit because there's a big question, but I would start by saying that all of these definitely are different. The life in the country, but also how you find your position at the university, and then how people work, like how will you interact with your colleagues, and not only how much do you work, when do you work, but also what is the like mode of how you work. All of these are definitely different in all of these places. So if I'm going to try to organize this so the answer is understandable. So I would like to start probably about one of the biggest things I feel like that we would think of if we look at United States, Japan, or Germany. That's work-life balance, so the work culture in general. And I feel that if we are researching in Germany, the research is treated much more like a job. So as a PhD student, I also was an employee of my institute on a salary, and I think it is much more common for people to mostly consider this as a job where you clock in and you clock out at a different time. And that's like 5 days a week. Of course, I'm going to reveal that I definitely came in on weekends a lot during my PhD time, and I also lived fairly close to my work. I would even say that I sacrificed a bit more social life or private development than I should have done, probably. But overall, it is still a very job like experience. And if I compare that to, may want to add there that in fact there is also a union for researchers in Germany, and you are very much part of social security, of health insurance, and things like this. So it's considered to be like your job, basically. And one thing I would say in comparison to Japan, of course, is I cannot tell you exactly what it's like to be an employee because when I was working in Japan, I was a student. But one thing that is definitely striking is that academic life in Japan is much more integrated with your personal life. So you join a specific lab at an earlier stage. So let's say Japan is more like the English speaking world and so forth, that you have like this college structure where you have an initial, like after some initial generalist studies, you would commit, let's say, to biochemistry or biological school, and then you are attached to a research lab. And I felt the lab had much more of a family structure than just a workplace. So you basically go through multiple years of research work and studying with the other people in your lab. And I felt there was a very strong social cohesion between all the lab members. And you did a lot together. So like going out for food or drinks together was almost programmed, and people transferred more of their life to academia, to the lab, to university. So having lunch together, having dinner together, staying till fairly late, so staying longer, but then also during your workday, meeting your lab mates, which were also part of your friends in the tea room, for example, or going out to do some sports, coming back to the lab. That was striking to me. So your private life and your academic life were very integrated. And then following that idea, so looking at the United States, I would say again, it is more like research is again more self-driven. So it's not so much that you're an employee, but more like, I guess, an agent of your own research or your own career. So it's just much more individualist lifestyle of the United States. And I definitely think that there is a strong drive in the US also to work longer, as like even just to be seen. The cohesion between people like at the workplace was inhomogeneous. Some people, of course, were hanging out together a lot, but I wouldn't say that our lab had like any kind of familial or strongly socially connected structure, which of course is not mandatory. Like I don't think that is necessarily healthy to have in the first place. But it was definitely very, very common when you come in on the weekend that the lab is full. So you meet people who, in a different way, do not really draw a line between not being at work and being at work. So both of these countries, all three of these countries, have slightly different approaches to how you, even as an academic, relate to your work. And then in the United Kingdom, I would definitely say this is much more like Germany in many ways. Like culturally, it's more European. I would again say that it's common to have people on a bit more of a grind set because it's the University of Cambridge. There is people who work after hours and who work weekends, of course. I do think, and this is unlike, let's say, in the United States, administration or people who work facilities services don't necessarily work like this. So they are very much on a like completely employee mindset. It's only the academic, like the researchers, like postdocs or graduate students, so PhD applicants who grind or who you would see grinding. Whereas, for example, in the United States, I felt that even the academic administration, so people who are not really directly in a research career track or people who operate facilities, also have a strong grind set. So they are really incentivized to work harder and spend longer hours, and of course, not necessarily paid longer hours. So I think that's the first thing that struck me. And I've only been in the UK for a few months. I have never lived in this country before, so I'm by no means qualified to give you a complete rundown of the work culture here. But I think the dichotomy between some of the international people who come into Cambridge specifically for research and I guess what the city locally looks like is striking. So it's locally more like Europe, but then the researchers coming in often have a more US like work schedule. So now,
Thank you.
yeah, so now I've talked about the work culture, and I think I could, if you want to know about other things, I could talk about many different aspects of academia. So one thing that I, for example, liked about Japan, it was highly organized. Of course, we all know like these stereotypes of Japanese rail traffic, for example, or generally public transport being very structured, organized, people waiting in line neatly. And I think this transfers to working in a lab. So we had a lab tech who I'm actually still friends with back in Japan. And she was very, very on top on organizing the lab. So that means it was everything was highly structured and fairly clean and organized. That's a strong and there was a strong contrast to, for example, what you see in the United States, where it was unusual to see people in a lab who are not on this academic track. So people who are not like in this schedule of being students or PhD students or postdocs, you didn't really see them much in any lab. So all the organization only happened on an individual level. There was no like, I guess, supporting structure around the lab work. So in Japan, also in Germany, you had lab techs who do a lot of the organization. And then following that, and this is true for Japan, Germany, and the UK, there's services like people who help you, for example, do dishes in the lab, who do cleanup, like sterilization of biological waste and things like this. All of this in the United States is completely self-organized. So there is a contrast in what is considered to be like service or base and what you are expected to take care of yourself between that and I think that's a line that's drawn on the Atlantic basically.
Interesting. I didn't know this difference. Yeah, we usually take care of everything ourselves while we're working in the lab.
Yeah.
And thank you so much, Emmanuel. That was really precious information you shared with us. One more thing about the quality of the research. Some people, we usually hear this, right? Some people say America has top-notch universities with a really different level of research, and especially when it comes to the grant when it comes to the budget they spend with the projects they usually do. That makes a huge difference with other countries. Based on your experience, how do you see that? How do you see US is different than UK, than Germany, in case of the budgets and the quality of the research they usually do?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think there's no straightforward answer to this. So, again, to break it down and make this like an understandable answer, I would say on average in the United States, there's going to be more money. So that means, and of course, I have been in one lab, in the lab in the United States, there's no place I have been where we, let's say, were allowed to be so wasteful with resources. So we had a lot of access to expensive material, and services and goods were very much at hand. So there were less limitations on like buying lab equipment or consumables, and typically services like that you would need in and around our research were very available. So there definitely was good amounts of like cash for expenditures available. And comparing that to, well, I guess I have to add then that also went hand in hand with a very wasteful mindset. So I don't think even the most basic items that could be recycled or that could be, let's say, homemade in the lab, we ever did this. So, for example, there's a number of items that I don't know what. So I think I'm not going to be too precise because the audience might be from very different fields. But basically, there are some things in a typical lab, like a biolab where I work, you can make yourself, or you can take care of yourself, or you can recycle and reuse. And in the United States, we do not do that. There is really a spending and waste mindset. Almost like there's almost this culture of entitlement to waste in the United States. Maybe you've experienced this yourself, but what I gathered from this is that lots of resources are there, but sometimes we use more resources than we really have to use for things. In my experience, both in Germany and Japan and the UK, is that overall you have less money to just spend on random consumables or expendable items, and you have to start calculating more how you use money for lab research, how you use different items, and maybe think about taking care of items that you can actually make yourself or prepare yourself. Then you would do this. And then if items are recyclable, you would also have to do this. And of course, a part of your work, like of your work time, goes towards doing this. But I also felt we are much more organized about, let's say, not buying things twice that we already, like when we already have one, not wasting any resource, and managing what we have and identifying what we really need to buy and what we might not need to buy. Definitely, the United States has more of an abundance mindset. You will have access to more stuff, and people take that for really, really granted. That, of course, can be convenient and make some stuff very easy if you are there. And now I want to say, however, that there is also a bit more of an all-inclusive mentality back in Germany, or let's say in Japan. So, for example, I'm going to just give you an example from Germany. There are services that we need around the lab, such as, for example, doing mass spectrometry, which typically you need an expert to help you with, or let's say some microscopy services. And when I did my PhD in Germany, we were in a house where all of this was readily available to researchers working there at no cost. And there were highly trained experts who would help you set up your experiments or anything you needed to do. And that was considered to be just a given in that situation. Also, I mentioned we had lab techs, and for my boss at the time, having like the money, the position of a lab tech was kind of guaranteed. So there were like a lot of all-inclusive things that you had. Somebody who helps you wash dishes in the lab, for example, or clean up things. I mentioned that. And again, in the United States, while technically you have more money, but you also need to pay for everything. So there's no, let's say, guaranteed stuff you can use. So I think at the end of the day, you can use good resources in either of the settings. Just, I guess, the relation you have to these resources. So how much do you have to think about using them? But also where does the money or the funding come from is a little bit different. So in the US, everything you buy for is grants from your PI. In Germany, there's more stuff that, let's say, the institution or the state has already taken care of. And now to the ever present question of quality of research. So I think the United States has a much stronger focus on people being very responsible for what they're doing themselves and on application. We rarely meet researchers in the United States who are not thinking about how their research is somehow going to be spun into a company or a startup of sorts or into some form of patents. And that was really different for me coming from Germany, where I hadn't a single colleague who considered that they want to start a company or patent some of their research to spin this out themselves. So I think the drive to apply and market is very strong in the United States, and that drive directs a lot of what type of research you're doing. Everything has to be applicable, marketable, sellable in a sense. I think if you want to do research that focuses around making a product that is finished, that's going to be much faster and easier in the United States, and you probably will also have the ability to throw a lot of resources at it. On the other hand, a lot of very basic understandings like research into principles or fundamentals of various topics, those still very much come out of Europe or Japan. And I think you can see this in publications. And of course, it's a matter of which field we are in. But for example, I've started my research, and I think it's still in that direction in the field of protein homeostasis, which really, I would say, is basic research that doesn't have an immediate venue for marketing. And I think the availability of this research is just as good, if not better, in Germany, in Europe. And there's also more patience for training people because not everything has to be directed towards, inventing the next big thing and making something profitable. So I think I think you will not be surprised to hear that the majority of postdocs in the United States are not actually from the United States, because it's really hard to do a postdoc coming from the US because you are in debt when you finish graduating from university. And then postdocs, while making on average more money than you would get from the same position in, let's say, Europe, also will have to deal with much higher expenditure. So thinking about it this way, I think if you see the university as a ground for training and for basic knowledge, quality of research in Europe, in the very least, isn't lacking behind the United States in any way. If you think about making a startup, sure, yeah, the United States are much stronger at doing this because they have very different funding structures, and they have this high risk, can do mindset. So the way that knowledge innovation is approached in the United States is different. And I think this is also important when you just compare different universities like Cambridge, Rice, Harvard, Tokyo Institute of Technology, or any university that we haven't even talked or heard about. The basic experiments, they all cook with water. I don't know if this translates well to English, but the structure of what people do in all of these labs, like how do you do your experiments, who's working there, how smart are these people, I would say they're all very similar. And I've been in all these places, and not one of these places is fundamentally ahead or much stronger or better than all the other places. All of them have really smart people working on difficult issues, and they all set up their experiments in similar ways, even though the work culture and how you spend your resources is a little bit different, and maybe what you plan to do once you're done with your research.
That was amazing. Yeah, I think it's the matter of the mindset of the researchers, as you said. In the US, is more into market and industry, the mindset of more of the researchers. And yes, and one more question, Manuel, that a student usually asks me, undergrad students, is the collaboration environment in these countries. What do you think about the potential for undergrads who coming to the school, for example, in Cambridge or in Germany, and how they have the chance to contribute to the research, doing research with PhD students and getting publications, getting hands-on experience in the lab? Because I have received some messages from students, especially in Europe countries like France, that they're not allowed to do research, and it's really hard for them to add some research experience while they're doing undergrad life. But in the US, we have tons of undergrads coming, doing research, helping the students, researchers, and making really a strong research experience for themselves. Can you also compare this collaborational approach of the countries and the universities been through?
Absolutely. So I would start by saying this is probably driven by your individual, like boss or the PI or the professor of a group, more so than the country. So there's professors who will involve undergrads in research and others not so much. And also there's professors who will facilitate lots of collaboration or allow it, and others who may be more defensive about this. But in general, I would agree with your observation. So my experience doing my undergrads and masters in, especially the undergrad in Germany, is that this is really, really considered to be a study program. It's much more like school in a sense. So you're there to, I guess, to a degree, if I want to be cynical, tick boxes and learn skills. Like you learn this module, this module, this module, and you do a test. You prove that you have like knowledge A, B, C, D, and you were really not treated that much as like an independent agent in research at that time. In my bachelor's degree, think there was no expectation that I would contribute to publications of any sort, or that I would have my own, like, or like even be like a co-author. At the end of my bachelor's degree, I did work towards like on a weird project, so that was definitely an option. But being fairly inexperienced on that didn't actually result in any measurable research results. And I think the group also wasn't super motivated to follow this up. So what really is happening is that because there was no expectation that you are a researcher from an early like time point in your education, they also didn't like push you on finishing any kind of research project. So I think if you are doing a bachelor's degree in Germany in research, you are unlikely to work towards any kind of or authorships on publications, and that would only change towards your master or eventually as you go for the PhD. And I think that it's very, very different in the United States, definitely. So I was supervised. So I very motivated to supervise students, grad students, master students. I've supervised PhDs, and I've supervised other postdocs at times. So very different situations. And it, while I would say, yeah, I did have, so I actually have to go back a step. When I did my PhD in Berlin, I was supervising students who also appeared on my publications from that time. So I would definitely say that that goes into my argument of saying it depends on which group you are and what your supervisor is like. So possible there, but where I did my master student, that wasn't so much feasible. And then going to the United States, I continued supervising people. And again, I definitely included students I supervised in my publications. And I would say it is much, much more common than that. The moment you commit to studying in the US, you are also attached to a lab. So it is much more, it's much less like a school project or program where you learn skill, and it's much more where you are thrust into participating in very, very real life applications early on. And I think you could say that is very good in terms of like quickly learning to apply yourself, gaining very, very real life skills. Of course, that means you come into the lab with at a much, much younger age and with much less theoretical or practical skills. So there's a learn on the job approach, which in the worst case means that more senior researchers, like, which I was at the time, have to juggle a lot of, let's say, newcomers who just don't have any kind of experience in what they're doing. That can go very right or it can go wrong in some cases. But in the best case and on the better end of things, that also means that you have people who start doing very real research early on. And if they grow into this quickly, then there's a much higher chance that you will be publishing. To finish this up, I think the same will be true in Cambridge. There's also this idea that you start at being attached, like working in a lab earlier on, not as strongly so as in the United States, but still. And conversely, in Japan, you also have this mindset that students get attached to labs and like are very much focused on a specific research project much, much earlier. So it's more like the Anglophone world in that sense, but it's also more hierarchical. So ultimately, again, decisions about who does what and when is much, much more dependent on the boss. So in Japan, it's like this big professor. And in fact, the professor of the lab I was working in when I was in Japan, I rarely ever met him because there was a sub professor who was still like under the big professor, and that was the actual supervisor of the group, but he was still not really independent. So I think in general, expect to do much more hands-on stuff much earlier with less supervision, with less controls in the United States. That can get you applying stuff much earlier, but also that means you get thrown like basically into the water much sooner. Overall, Europe, Japan, more hierarchical, more structured, more school-like.
Thank you. Emmanuel, as a researcher, as a scientist, what do you think, what are the challenges that scientists usually encounter?
Challenges that scientists encounter. In terms of my personal career, I think the first thing for academia is that classic, like when you see people talking about work-life balance, or like problems with work, getting health insurance, getting retirement funds, or getting like taking sick days, or working for a company, there's always things that people complain about, and of course things that they like about this. And academia is just this odd parallel society, because a lot of the things that apply to most jobs don't apply in academia. So it's much more self-driven on average. Many of the structures, even though you technically should be working a job where you have specific work hours and your specific income and specific benefits or conditions, they're almost always more squishy and like fuzzy, I would say, compared to working in a private sector company that has like a very specific work contract and very specific expectations or stipulations. So I think that academia isn't like a job, even though you're working on it like a job. That is the number one boon and also difficulty. And it's incredibly important before you decide to work on this, that you understand this is the case, so that you will not working a job like everybody else. So at the best of days, I would say that means no work day I have is ever like the previous one. But in other cases, it also means that your, like, say, work schedule, your work experience, your CV doesn't match at all what everybody else is experiencing, basically. And I think it's good to understand this early, especially if you don't know whether like academic life, like working in universities, is for you. Now, thinking in a much more global sense, what are problems right now for researchers, for scientists? I think we're living in a time where we face a lot of backlash to rational research, to science, to investigation. We are living in, some people call this a post-factual age, where provable, measurable things are being devalued, and we are living more, and we are more and more sliding into an age of subjective truth and loud voices, especially on social media. So I think scientific integrity in general is definitely being challenged. by media, by the AI, by politics, by angry people.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I think scientists deserve more. I'm not sure you agree with this.
I think we cannot not talk about scientific career pathways, because when you're working, let's say being a PhD student, a postdoc, even like an early stage PI, it is really, really common to not have a stable job, right? So you have high expectations, you are extremely qualified, but very basic things like knowing where you're going to work in 5 years, or having stable retirement funds, or like say healthcare, things like this, are not always guaranteed for researchers. So you have this weird mix of very like high qualified, high energy, high expectations in like work life, but at the same time you don't get a lot of structure unless you make it for yourself, and the supporting nets, I say, are weak for research. So that, I think, is much better in Europe than the United States, but overall scientists deserve to be treated better in this regard.
That's true. Was there any moment in your career where you thought, wow, I can't believe this is happening? Have you ever had any experience like that?
Like in a good or in a bad way? So I would start by saying some of the very good things, of course. At some points I've getting fellowships, so it's always, of course, wonderful if you win a fellowship that is by no means guaranteed and that helps you get research funding and securing your position, which should be secure in the first place. So that obviously always is a high point of your research life, which really does a lot for you personally, but also for your career outlook. And so in general, I've always been happy to like get the next position or get that fellowship. And sometimes, of course, there are these research results where one day you just know you have some really, really interesting data points. And I definitely think that is exciting. But I would say there's also those days where you feel like nothing works or will ever work. And because of that, it is incredibly important to have more than one thing going on in your life. So there is days where I love my job. There's days where I think I'm not really good at my job. And then I should have a private life, something else that I enjoy doing, that I think I want in my life, that I can do. Because if all I had was my research and at some week or months nothing works, I would be really, really depressed over that. So it's really an up and down. Like it's a sinus curve that we might all be experiencing going through this research lifestyle, especially because research can be so personal and like a passion project almost all the time, where you start to identify with what is supposed to be your career, and then that makes it elating if it goes well. It makes it terrible if it doesn't go well, because then everything seems to crumble. So I think if you ask me, did I have one moment where I think, oh, this can't be happening? I have those every few months because it goes up and down. And then there's a moment where I can't believe how good everything is going. And another moment where I am desperate about how bad everything is going. And then it swings right back. So I think this happens quite a lot, actually.
I see. How do you deal with stressful periods of pressure?
Yeah, so I hinted at this. I definitely try to have more than one focal point in my life. Starting within the research world, I rarely work on just one thing. Like if I have one project, I try to have more than one solution to that. If I'm in the lab, I try to have more than one project I'm interested in. So if one thing isn't going so well, then maybe the other is. Still, at some point, everything is going to go poorly in the lab. So you're going to be really stressed out. You feel like nothing is moving forward. And then I try to also keep my private life great. And that means to never sacrifice, so I try not to sacrifice social life or my hobbies, my private development, my well-being for the lab, for research, for my work. So, and that means if I have a very, very, well, let's say a bad day at work, I can clock out, I can sign out, go home, and still be very confident with what I'm doing outside of that. And I think learning to detach yourself from what's happening at work is a very, very good strategy to deal with that stress. But of course, it's not a given, it's a skill. So I think it is hard to forget what work is like, because in research, as I mentioned, it has more of a tendency to blend with your private life, with your identity. So there's less of a transition between being at work and not being at work, which makes this so tricky. I also try to internalize success. So I think in academia, more than any other field, imposter syndrome is incredibly common. Maybe everyone has it, really. And that's really just a feature of being very studied and doing very complicated things. And to deal with this, sometimes having a very rational understanding of what you have already achieved, reminding yourself of what you can do, and where you that where you're standing right now isn't the starting point, but you're already on a plateau of sorts. I think that is really, really important. And I think in this case, it's really important to keep in mind that even if you are if you have a prestigious fellowship and you work at the University of Cambridge, there is still days where you might sit in the lab and think you're worthless. And it is really, really not, that's not a function of you actually being worthless, but it's a function of the human mind. And you really need to train to de-stress, to value yourself, to ground yourself, I guess. That's a skill you need to acquire in this field.
Nice. Did you ever feel lost or unsure about your path?
Definitely, yes. Lost and unsure a lot. I mentioned this, so it happens frequently where I feel like, oh, nothing is working, or I don't know if what I'm doing makes any sense right now. I don't know if I know what I'm doing anymore. That comes in waves more than in individual events. So even if I recover, but I already know there's going to be another point in the future where I again feel that I cannot move forward and I'm lost. I don't know what to do. Again, what helps me in this point, especially, is to remember that this happened before, right? So remember, we've fixed this problem before. We've overcome this seemingly unsurmountable challenge before. So I think that saves me a lot thinking like this. But yeah, I would say this is frequent. So I'm lost because I feel like my project doesn't make any sense, or I can't complete it, or I will let down maybe some people. And almost always, eventually you find a solution, you find a way forward. It takes time, but reminding yourself of that is important.
How does working at Cambridge feel compared to your past places? Is it something special, and do you recommend someone to add the prestigious schools to their resume?
Good question. I believe so. I'm going to be a little bit careful about talking about this because I'm currently employed at the University of Cambridge. But I would start by saying that you should probably not over focus on, let's say, certain rankings that are available online and scores or perceptions of what is the best university in the world. So I've mentioned this earlier in this talk. Every university I've been in, the one that is the ones that you've heard about, the ones that appear in big rankings and the ones that don't appear in big rankings, has pretty smart people working there, and they all sometimes do complicated experiments, and they all know what they're doing and they're working hard on this. So I think if we talk about how special is any one university, sometimes it looks more special from the outside, but then when you are in, you see that they are all fairly similar in many ways. So if you've been to a biolab, you probably recognize what biolabs at Cambridge look like. And I would say, in terms of how much money you have to throw at stuff, how abundant is everything, Rice University would beat Cambridge in this regard. There's just more cash going around. At least in the group I was in, we were really, really free to spend a lot. Does Cambridge have a lot of really smart, highly qualified people and some of the probably, best equipment, best projects? Sure, but of course you still often need to pay for access or usage of this. And typically there's competition for time on any device. So, and there's of course also a very, very big demand for people to go to Cambridge because everyone wants to have this prestigious university in their CV. I think it will be helpful because everybody from the outside perceives it as such. And there is a degree of substance to it because in a way, this is a self-fulfilling prophecy. If a university has this reputation of being extremely eminent, then some of the most eminent and motivated people will try to go there, and they will go there. And then that kind of fulfills itself. If you are asking, okay, I want to do research in a lab, let's say in my field is chemistry or biology or physics, can you only really do that well at Cambridge? No, I would say that university that is not even like top 100 in the world or so, like a university that you haven't heard about, may easily be able to give you those same conditions, and you can find good teachers there. And you will probably sometimes be surprised at what kind of good conditions you can find at these places, even if they are not these most highly esteemed universities. And I would say that field and people are more important than the overall evaluation of a university. So, for example, there is a university like Rice in Rice, which is going to be very, very outstanding in one specific type of research. So, for example, bioengineering at Rice, which is famous. And then there's other fields which you may just be good, but not like outstanding. And then within these fields, you also have to see that you can be at the best university in the world, but if your personal behavior or your group does things in an average fashion, then that's still average, right? So it's really not that the university makes you good. It's more like there's good people working at the university, right? So I think that is important to understand. So there is a lot of image, and the image is real. And sometimes the image brings opportunities and strengths, but ultimately it's up to yourself, and you should predominantly look what field are you in. So which is the best condition for your field, and do you yourself have the motivation to be really good? You can probably be good at a place that isn't famous. But so if you take a really, really good researcher from Cambridge into a university that isn't famous, they are still going to be really, really good.
So, Emmanuel, I'm going to give you some words, and I want you to give your feeling about these words.
Absolutely.
So the first word is United States of America.
Fraud right now. So I've lived there. I enjoyed it. I went voluntarily. I would go again. But right now, I cannot imagine putting my center of life to the United States. And that would even be the case if the previous or the next election, I could change those. I would still think that there is issues in the United States that won't make it attractive to me. I've lived in the United States. I would probably do it again. There's many things I like. I couldn't put my center of life to the United States. And that is not just because of how the elections have gone or how the next election might go, but there's also basic things about like the work culture, the culture of life, how the cities look that for me as a European make it hard to live. So I think it's not surprising that Cambridge, UK, and Houston, Texas are diametrically opposed cities in terms of what they look like and how people live there. And I think if you have been to Europe or even any other country and you have been to the United States, that's a really good experience because you learn what is so different about these countries. But for me, leaving also taught me what is good about the country I came from. And in that sense, I would say I have a divided view of the United States. Many things very good, but also things that make me want to not be there forever.
If you weren't scientist, what career?
If I wasn't a scientist, what career? So when I entered university, honestly, I was kind of considering diplomacy. So joining Ministry of Foreign Affairs and becoming like not a politician, but like a basically a state servant diplomat for Germany. And for the same reason, because just like research, this is an intrinsically international work that always fascinated me. I aspired to do work that is transnational and for a long time. And I think both research and diplomacy are like that a lot. That was something I had my eyes on for a long time. But then the other big thing was scientist. Actually, I'm a very, very motivated hobby baker and cook too. So I often have people joking to me, you could just sell your cakes. I have to admit, if I did that, it wouldn't be a hobby anymore. And I think that would take a lot of the fun out of it. So I want to keep a hobby as a hobby. But yeah, take your pick of these two. That could have been my different career.
That's true. I think you already answered my second question, but I'm gonna ask it again. It's a small thing that makes you happy.
Yeah, I would definitely say food is a big thing. So I answered, I cook and bake, but I also eat a lot. So, like this may sound dumb, but when I move to a city, to places, definitely like, can I find good food in and around the place, plays a role. And I think being reasonably close to London ticks the box around here. Also, I'm positively surprised about some of the Cambridge food culture. But overall, I have been increasingly living in places that allow me to eat happily. So I would definitely think that's a big thing for me.
Do you feel happy in life, and what is your definition for happiness?
Ooh, now that's a deep and philosophical question. So um, I feel very happy on some days and not so happy on other days. I wonder, this may be the same answer for everyone. So there's definitely things that have worked out better in my life and things that have worked out worse. But in terms of in the very least, the career I chose, that means living in in many different places, seeing totally different things in very different work environments, and continuing as a researcher. I definitely like doing this, so I don't regret this, and I would do this again. So that makes me happy. Not necessarily easy, so it doesn't, like being a researcher doesn't always make that doesn't necessarily make you rich, and it comes with its own type of stress. Like moving continents can be stressful. So for example, when I moved all my stuff from Houston to the UK, due to some formality, like there's a box that hasn't been ticked, they had it up at customs and sent it back to Houston. So most of my belongings right now are not in my apartment. So that is wild, and that stresses me out. I was angry when I learned about this, but what can you do? I will figure that out eventually. So there's always things that make me stressed and frustrated. I think when you go for this type of research, you have to be prepared for what this means. So, for example, changing residence a lot, like moving to different countries, that comes with benefits and it comes with costs to you. I think understanding that this is going to happen is the most important part. So, yeah, I think that's the smartest answer to am I happy that I can give. I think if somebody can answer this question with a clear yes or no, that would be fishy. So, what is happiness? Huh, deep. Now, taking a long walk, um, stopping by the nice little restaurant, having some food, not spending too much time in the lab on a weekend, but getting just the right amount of stuff done that I feel like I'm excited for what's happening next week. Coming home and then maybe having an online chat with some of my friends whom I not necessarily seeing physically so often, but I can talk to them online. That's pretty much what makes me happy.
That's a great answer. Thank you so much, Manuel. I really appreciate your time. I really enjoyed, and that was a great conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope this has been helpful for somebody and people will be interested in hearing what I have to say.
Of course, I hope
Yes.
students enjoyed watching our conversation. And if you enjoyed the conversation, please like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel and wait for future coming videos also. Have a great day and night and enjoy your time and take care.
Bye bye.